This podcast is part of the How We Are network. For information on this episode and many other like-minded shows, visit howweare.org. That's HOWWEARE.org.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. Thank you for joining us. I am your host, Ray Harkins, and let's talk about last episode. Holy crap, so many of you downloaded that. La Dispute, and more specifically, Jordan, the singer, is quite a popular chap on the internets. You got a lot of retweets and reblogs and all of that other good stuff. So yes, if you are a new listener, thank you for joining. Keep joining. It'll be fun. It's a nice little ride. For those of us who have been here since episode 1, which is like me, it's been fun. So, well, welcome. Continue along. The guest this week is Mr. Joe Marro from the early November. He also played a little bit in Hello Goodbye and a bunch of other bands, and we'll talk about that. But more on him in a minute. Let's get some biz out of the way. Let's talk Property of Zach. I got to hang out with Zach like last week, and it was fun. He came through on tour, and he's just a good guy. And I like him, and you should check out his site. It's got a bunch of great writing, a lot of good interviews recently. Like I'm not a big guy on text interviews because, I'm old and I don't need to read what's happening with this band's new record and how it's their best thing ever. But they ask more specific questions, which elicits more interesting responses, which is great. So check that site out. Visit the show's website, 100wordspodcast.com. Email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. I've been trading some emails with a lot of new listeners, and I'm happy about that. And if you are feeling ever so generous, go to the iTunes store, drop some stars, tell us how awesome the show is or how terrible it is, how this person should never be on. I've also been getting a lot of interesting guest ideas from people. People texting me. Like longtime friends are like, hey, you should have someone on for this. It's awesome. Like it just, I don't know, it makes me feel, well, not only connected to all of you, but that you're engaged, that this is something that you look forward to. And that, that's a heavy feeling for me, and it's awesome. So, and yeah, this is episode 101. It keeps going. And I'm so stoked because there's so many awesome guests that I have to bring you. Listen to the end of the show. I'll tease a few. And a previous guest of this podcast, I appeared on his podcast. That's kind of what you do. If you do a podcast for a long period of time or even a short period of time, you just all kind of support one another. It's kind of like us playing shows together. That's the equivalent now. It's as opposed to, hey, do you want to play a show? It's like, hey, do you want to come on my podcast? So Matt Pryor from the Get Up Kids, he was, a few episodes ago, and he asked me to be on his podcast. And for those of you that did not check it out, I would encourage you to do so. Go visit ntwha.com, and you will find the episode on his website. I had a lot of fun. It was, a very long chat. I talked about a lot of stuff in my life that, I typically don't talk about, which is exactly the point of a podcast. Anyways, let's talk about Joe. Joe, this felt like just slipping into a nice robe with a nice cup of coffee and just kind of hanging out. Like I've felt this kinship towards Joe for a while because, I don't know, it's one of those things I'll tell the story, and so I won't spoil it, but he's just always felt very familiar to me, and like not in a creepy sense, but just an easy guy to hang out with. But yet we have so much in common, and I don't know, there's a lot of good stuff. But Joe tells a lot of stories about the early November's formation and just how unprepared they were as a band, which was honestly news to me. I mean, I knew that their ascent to the public eye was definitely quick, but hearing his early tour stories are just unbelievable. So listen and stick around after the show because I'll drop you some tidbits of who's coming up. So let's talk to Joe.
And do you know this reason? I hope that you can see it, 'cause I will not give up, and we all know what you've done again. I can see right through you. You're making your way over again.
So because I know that obviously since we've known each other, you've mentioned that, we met years and years and years and years ago when we played in New Jersey, but those times are obviously lost on the youth. But I mean, I remember reconnecting with you at our mutual friend Martin. He had a party, and I
Yep.
remember meeting you there. And it was one of those things where it was like there was, and this is the beauty of independent music, where like there's such a shorthand between you and I, where it's like I feel like we've been friends for 15 years, even though we haven't. We've literally never hung out with one another, but there's just that weird closeness. And I don't know. I mean, I don't generally feel that for everybody, but there's something, I don't know. You're very warm, Joe.
Thank you. Well, I don't think I've ever been described as warm, but I'll, I think it's just because of we all share this, whether how far people are into it, or even kind of regardless of maybe genre. It's like the kind of umbrella of DIY culture. It's like that's like a link that I think can no matter where you go, you find somebody who's sort of part of that, and you at least have some pretty serious common ground to start a friendship or any sort of relationship with. So yeah, that I remember that show quite well. It was at the Rotunda in Philly where I met you.
Yeah.
Or not officially met you, but I bought a Taken T-shirt and you sold it to me, and maybe the CD, but I'm not sure. But I know I bought a shirt.
I probably marked that shirt down in a notebook somewhere, and I still, in going through my old stuff, I still have the merch totals from past tours. It's like, dude, what am I keeping this for?
It's funny. I'm just kind of, I'm just trying to find that event online right now, just to see, just to put my head like in that space to kind of remember it a little bit better. But I don't remember who it was with, to be honest. I don't remember what tour that was.
Well, if it was at the Rotunda in Philly, it was probably we had to be playing with This Day Forward. Because I think that was the only time we played there. I think Burnt by the Sun played that show. If I don't know about that. I think that was actually a show too where it was my first experience with like the East Coast violence, as far as like the pit on the East Coast is so much different than the pit of what we experience in the West Coast. And I remember being punched in the face just because I was watching a band and kids were violently dancing.
Yeah, well, one of my favorites, same venue, Rotunda. I went to go see the Promise Ring.
Okay.
And forget who opened. I think like Camden or somebody opened that one. And Promise Ring were my favorite band growing up. Like super stoked for this show. And there's a fight that breaks out at the Promise Ring show. And like the Promise Ring aren't a tough band, but Philadelphia would just latch on to any band if they had some sort of association with punk rock or hardcore, and just fight at their shows. And Davey from the Promise Ring jumps off stage, tries to break it up. He gets punched in the face. The drummer jumps off and punches the guy who punched Davey in the face, who I turned out knowing. I know the guy who started the whole thing, just because everybody just sort of knew each other, whether you liked him or not.
Right.
That's the way Philadelphia was for a long time. It's not that violent anymore, at least not that I've noticed. But
right,
that time was a sketchy time,
dude. I mean, I shouldn't laugh at someone getting punched, but I can't imagine Davey throwing and or receiving a punch.
I think he was there to kind of like just breaking it up, and just got popped in the face.
Oh, poor guy.
Yeah, it was. I was so mad. I remember just being like, "Yeah, you messed my favorite band set up." Just so mad.
So mad. So describe. You were born on the East Coast, right? Like in the Jersey area. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So describe to me. Yeah, describe to me your upbringing and where you were born and all that stuff.
Okay, so I was born in a town called Washington Township, New Jersey, which is probably about 25, 30 like minutes or whatever from where I grew up. I grew up in a town called Hamilton, New Jersey, which is known as the blueberry capital of the world, but it's not really. That's a lie. Maybe it was at some point, but it's not anymore. It's like now it's probably like somewhere in Central America. I think they stole it.
Sure.
But it is certainly not the blueberry capital anymore, but they still call it that because Ronald Reagan came to our town in the early 80s and called it that. And he was, it was as like a cornerstone town of American commerce, and just so it was it's a farm town. I grew up more or less on a farm. My father owned his family owns an orchard, a peach orchard, and we're not farmers, they would just rent it out. But a lot of the upbringing was just part of that super rural, nothing to do, kind of kind of rednecky, I guess. Like
sure, there's elements of that.
Yeah, like lots of, you're in New Jersey, you're only a few miles from Atlantic City or Philadelphia, but from where we were, it was just like you may as well have been in, Wyoming or something, just because of how, like, culturally it just didn't make any sense from where we lived compared to other parts of that state. Really, it was just very rural, and not a breeding place for punk rock. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, no, not well. I imagine not a breeding place for anything that you would consider a quote unquote counterculture.
Nah, not at all.
So do you have brothers and sisters?
I did. I had an older sister. I have an older sister,
Mhm.
and she was pretty cool growing up. Um, she was like super into like the Smashing Pumpkins and like My So-Called Life and like sort of this angsty stuff that just kind of helped me get into it. So she would, we would watch MTV like everyone else, and I would watch The State and all these shows and
Uh-huh.
whatever else was on that time, and um, just sort of she did help, I guess, shape what I was going to get into,
Hmm.
which was nice. And then I kind of went from there.
She gave you the tools to know that like you didn't know how to express it, but you were just like, I identify with this weird stuff.
Yeah, I was probably in like middle school, and she was, a couple years older than me. But so she would hang out with some of the kids that I thought were like different and weird, like the few kids, like literally the few kids. My school, in high school at least, I had 150 kids in my graduating class. There was
Oh,
probably 500 kids total in the entire school.
that's small.
Yeah, so we're talking, we've got a very small pool of people in general. So we're, just number wise, you bill it down, you've probably got about 5 kids who were into anything that was sort of counterculture.
Right.
And she was sort of friends with the older ones, and I would say, oh, those guys look cool. I wonder what they're into.
Right.
So
So did you as far as, because I'm always intrigued by the quote unquote farm life. I mean, I've only had a little sampling of it in my life as far as just being in like really rural areas. My stepfather was born in a place called Farmington, Illinois, and I spent a lot of time there. And it was like, population of like about 2,000 people. So it's anybody that doesn't have that experience, it's like I feel sorry for them, because it's like you got to know how that side lives in order
yeah.
to put yourself in that world of like, oh yeah, like it's a more holistic perspective.
There's a big part of me that like loves it when I go back to, not like it's not even that far from where I live now, but when it's just a different world. So I live in Cherry Hill, New Jersey now, which is like the Manhattan of southern New Jersey. So my father will be like, I don't know how you live up there with all that traffic. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like
Yeah,
like you have to drive 30 minutes to get to Target. Like there's two within like eye shot of where I live. Like it's not that big of a deal, but I go down to my dad's like like during the summer or whatever, and just kind of I'll take an old bike around and just be like, this is pretty nice, but
yeah.
I got to get out of here like after a couple hours.
Right.
And it's not even like I live in the city or anything. It's just like there's nothing to do, but it is a valuable part of, like, growing up I thought was great. You could do anything and you can get into trouble and no one would know, just because there's so much space to kind of be a kid, and just skateboard, and which was also kind of weird, but I was super into skateboarding, most of my teens. And you can just, there's just warehouses that you could essentially break into and own because no one was using it, and you can just build a little mini skate park in there and use it until someone found out, and then you would go somewhere else and just kind of
Pick your own territory.
yeah, like the town is not massive, but it's pretty big, and there's just a lot of space to do whatever you wanted, and that was cool as a kid to not have like anybody on your back. You'd get in trouble. The cops would not wouldn't know what to do with skateboarders, and they would sometimes be aggressive, but overall it was a pretty cool place to live,
Hmm.
but then also kind of challenging as you got older.
Right. And did your mom basically take care of you and your sister, or did she work?
Yeah, my mom started working probably when I was like 11 or so. She got into real estate.
Oh,
She would actually got a job, I think, with BMG on the distro side. I'm not sure how, but or like from a company that was like a third party of like BMG. So she would have all these cassette tapes that were like damaged and just give them to me. So that was always kind of cool. They were, most of the time they were awful, but Every once in a while there'd be a good one in there.
That's amazing. So was it one of those like you get like 10 tapes for $1 or something like that?
No, it was she would go to like the she was like a rep for the store, so she would go to Kmart's and
Oh, got it. Yeah,
so
sure.
yeah, so and they would just have whatever was damaged from the like the shipment, and they would say we can't take these, send these back, or just trash them, and she'd say, oh, I'll take 'em, give them to my son or whatever. And my father is a dump truck driver, still is. So
Oh,
very
amazing.
yeah. So he would, this is blue collar stuff where I live.
People always if you're looking at jobs that people typically go like, oh well, at least I don't work at McDonald's or whatever, or at least I'm not a garbage man. Like did that ever, was that ever said to you, or it's like, oh, your dad's a dump truck driver, like, because there's that weirdness.
That town, it was like everyone did something in like agriculture, like farming, like somebody's, and this town is very wealthy. It still is. But the people you would never know. You would see some guy who owns one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, like blueberry farm / exporter in the entire country, right? But you would see this guy picking up his kids at school in some beat up 1980s, F-150. Just the way people are around that town. Like there's a lot of money. I don't know if it's true, but there was once a report saying in America, or maybe New Jersey, it's the most millionaires per square mile in that town.
Wow.
We weren't by any means. We were definitely like middle class for New Jersey, for that area, but like it's I don't know if that's a true statistic, but
Right,
that's
right.
what I always heard growing up. And you could it's pretty obvious when you'd see some of these people's houses that they're wealthy, but you would never really know. They weren't living a wealthy person's lifestyle aside from having like a pretty big farmhouse.
Right, right. They weren't flashy about it as
Yeah. So
obviously you see everywhere else.
like I don't know, like I would grow up and I would meet other people from other towns whose parents were like software developers, and they made, they were wealthy from the early days of the .com boom and whatever, and I would be like, that's a foreign land, from where I grew up. Like nobody was involved in that stuff. If you had money in my town, it was because you were like a foreman or a contractor or something.
Yeah, you made it with your hands.
Yeah, yeah. So I have a lot of respect for. I have a respect for anybody getting up and doing any job, as long as you do it with pride and like you do it. But I have a lot of respect for like my dad, who's just like he's born in 1945. He's like 69 or so, but who still does this stuff every day.
He's doing it, man.
Yeah, he learned how to fix and like pretty much build diesel engines just from them breaking all the time. He dropped out of school when he was probably 16 or so. Just like.
Yeah, salt of the earth.
When people meet him, they're like, "There's no way this is your father."
Right. Yeah, I look at you, and you don't scream to me, I can fix a diesel engine.
I can't pump my own gas barely. When I moved to California, I was like, "How do you even do this?" Because I'm in Jersey. I am the worst. But my dad, like, specifically kept me away from it. He was like, I don't want you doing this. This is not what I want you to do. So I guess I'm going to blame it on him, but also thank him, because I wouldn't survive in that world.
Interesting. So your father, he intentionally curbed learning from that perspective, because he felt like you can do something that's, I mean, obviously every parent wants their child to do quote unquote better than they did, but that's interesting. Your father took an active role in that.
Yeah, I remember asking when I was younger, just being like, I remember right out of high school, I was saying like, hey, I needed a job, and I was like, is there any like jobs on the sites, like construction sites, like holding signs or like being like running to get like being a runner or whatever? He's like, no, I don't want you anywhere near that world. Like those kids make good money. Like they join the union, they make good money, but like he's like, I don't want you doing that stuff. Like do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Don't.
That's interesting. So because obviously that you lived in a pretty supportive environment, your family, from what you've been telling me, obviously got along with, I'm sure there's bumps in the road or what have you, like every family has. So as you started to kind of develop your own taste, as far as through your sister, and then obviously the skateboarding and stuff like that, when did you start to feel that like, hey, I'm really interested in this stuff, and you started to dive a little bit deeper?
Probably like, I just watched that 1994 documentary on YouTube about like that year when Green Day and Offspring and like kind of popped everything wide open.
Uh-huh.
So probably like then. Like I was always super into music, but it was like the Beatles, and then it was like whatever 90s like uh rock. All that was stuff was really important. Nirvana and Pearl Jam was really important to me, but kind of when it really connected was probably like with the Offspring smash. That was like my big intro into what would become punk rock. And then, you remember like, you're seeing the CDs and then seeing Epitaph would slide in and all the labels would slide in a little mail order card. And like I would just go through and be like, I wonder what that is. And then I bought Punkorama 1 with the green and orange cover.
Oh yeah.
And like heard Bad Religion and who else was on there? I don't remember, but there was all the like Total Chaos, which I wasn't into, but I was like, it intrigued me, like I would say right around the age of, what are you in sixth grade? Like 12?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say that summer, like I went like head over heels for it because I was never like any good at any real sports. And then also like just that was kind of the time when all that stuff got, put in your face, and like skateboarding was all of a sudden like in commercials, whether it was like cool or not. It was like you would start seeing these things 1994, 1995, around that time. And then it just kind of, I went nuts, snowballed into it and just couldn't get enough of it.
Right, right. And did you so you with the idea that you were terrible at sports, you were like, well, I guess this is kind of the other option to that, the flip side to that?
With music?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think around my uncle had like a guitar sitting around too. So I would just, kind of play that. And I don't know what it was that was so appealing about like punk or indie rock at the time, but it was something to do with just like, I didn't like what the other kids at school were into. And I think at that time, it must have been a lot of like Limp Bizkit and early like new metal or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And like in rap, which I was always okay with rap, but I just wasn't that into it. And then also just my sister knowing some kids that I just thought they were cool because they were different and they looked like the people from Mallrats, which
Yeah.
was my favorite movie. And like no one else looked like that, but they kind of were these, dirty kids who were, just into slightly different things. And so all that stuff around that time, 1995, I think, Mallrats comes out, skateboard. I get my, there's a Toy Machine video, Welcome to Hell, that comes out.
Oh yeah.
411 Pops of Promise Rings. Well, maybe that was a little bit later, but 411 videos are coming out. Like everything just sort of mid 90s just went nuts. And I just went crazy for that stuff.
Right. You couldn't put enough in your head. I find it interesting because I do think that there, you said something in regards to like you saw what was out there as far as like what your other peers were consuming. And then there was that sort of intangible feeling that you weren't identifying with it. And I find that it's like, I really wish that it was easier to describe than that, where it's just like, yeah, it's that thing where you just didn't want to join up with, and it isn't so much of a, like screw you sort of, anti-authoritarian, like I'm not part of this sort of thing, but it's just like, it doesn't scratch that itch,
Yeah, I don't know what gets people interested in the things like on a pure level that just sparks something in them. I have no idea what it is. I think about it every once in a while. But I really don't know what it was that told me, that got me more interested in the stuff that other people kind of weren't into yet.
Yeah, yeah. And so did you, as you started to, dive into, music as far as that was concerned and started to, have bands that you felt a very close attachment to, did you have the concept that you wanted to actually play and perform in a band?
Yeah, there was a ska band called the Havoc Tones from my town. So this was like the first punk band probably ever since the 80s that, was doing something.
Uh-huh.
In that town. So my uncle had like a band and they were like 80s classic rock kind of band. And I would go watch them practice just because I liked to be around instruments and music, but I had no idea what they were playing. And he would give me Led Zeppelin records or whatever, and I just had no real interest in those songs. Maybe one or two songs I would like, but just wasn't into it. So eventually I see the ska band around town, and the drummer was friends with my sister. So I would just go to their practices. They would kind of like adopt me as like this kid that they would let hang out. And I would just go to their practices and sit there, just be around people playing music. I don't even remember I remember what they sounded like, but I can't tell you whether or not it was good because I don't think any actual recordings were ever made. But they were starting to get like cool shows,
Mhm.
and they were booking shows in town. The first punk show I ever went to, they booked and they played, and it was a pretty good one too. It was this was probably around, I want to say like 96.
Okay.
And it was Less Than Jake headlining. Weston was direct support, and the first of three was the local band, the Havoc Tones.
Okay.
So, and this was right before Losing Streak came out, I think, the Less Than Jake record.
Uh-huh.
And I bought a 7-inch called the Pesto 7-inch, which had the dog on the cover. And I didn't even have a record player, but like, I was just like, whoa, this is neat. Like, this is something we used to have around the house. Like, why are these bands making these things? And, I picked up my first Very Distro catalog and I said, what is this, a magazine? It's just naming records, but it had ads in it for other records. And I picked up, my first, zine, having no idea what it was. And that was a huge, I remember that show super well. Like,
Yeah.
it was the first one. And then I saw kids jumping. I crowd surfed for the first time.
Nice.
It was as like a 14-year-old kid or whatever. That show was a huge one for me.
Yeah.
And then just sort of
that was
hunting.
a turning point. Yeah.
And like once you you're like like looking for drugs or whatever. Like you had to go out and find more of these shows, but they weren't hard to find when you don't have a driver's license and there's literally nothing going on within a 20-mile radius of you.
Right. I love the notion of what you're saying with a zine, and obviously, like, I mean, the Very Distro catalog, like, that was the Bible. You looked at that and you were just like, what record? Because like people that obviously have grown up with the internet and the ease of access to music, the process gets lost on you blind bought records. You had
all the time.
you had no idea what they sounded like. Sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. But it's just like that idea of hey, I'm going to spend my $20 on these two records and hopefully they're good. And even if they're not, I'll have to kind of act like they're good just because I spent my money on it.
Yeah, I think it taught you a lot of patience and a lot of like attention span exercises, which I don't think is a big thing anymore. But like I would buy a record that maybe I didn't, based on the recommended if you like parts.
Yep.
And maybe not liking it at all, or just not thinking it sounded anything like the bands they said it did. And then sort of just sticking with it and finding elements you did like. And then eventually maybe you enjoyed the album. Maybe eventually you enjoyed a song or two, but I would make it a point to go and once a week, at that point now, trying to buy a new CD a week. This is before I was buying vinyl. I don't think vinyl had it was still around, but it wasn't like the huge thing that I kind of think it is now. But buying that distro would just say, I would see a Hot Water Music logo. I have no idea what they sounded like. I didn't even know the bands that they were referencing them to. But I'd buy what is it, like Fuel for the Hate Game or whatever one of the first ones were.
Yep.
But through them, you discover who I never admittedly, I never got that in the Hot Water Music, which will sound like sacrilege to a lot of people, but
it's okay.
But the band, but it would say later on, I would see like Alkaline Trio's first 7-inch, an Asian Man. It would say for fans of Hot Water Music. I bought that one, and that band, that early records changed a big part of my life at that time. So
it's like all these little doors that you walk into and show you other universes, and it's like it's on such a small microcosm, but at the same time it obviously causes such a cultural impact and also an impact on all of our individual lives for being like going down these rat holes.
Yeah, I wish there was a way for us to I wish there was a way to thank more things, that don't even exist anymore. But It's so important that these things existed. And maybe that's why I still want to be involved so much, just to keep it, it's not like it's going to go anywhere if I'm not involved, but I just want to play my part of I was having a discussion recently about what these things meant with another friend of mine who's way more into hardcore. But in the hardcore scene was always kind of satelliting kind of the bigger umbrella of DIY culture, but it's such an important thing to kind of shaping who you are, and I feel lucky for kind of discovering it when I did.
Yeah, no, I like the way you put that as far as because I think all of us that have been involved for a prolonged period of time with this stuff, I think there's that sort of whatever you're doing, whether it's working at a label, playing in a band, like doing anything, it's that sort of like that feeling like you are creating your own little love letter to that
Yeah.
stuff that preceded you, where it's like, oh yeah, you're able to tell these stories and relate and still be excited about music, but have this wide tapestry of things that you can reference,
Yeah, I think it's very important to like know where, even if just kind of know where you came from, and like uh I'm still doing that now. I'm still like watching, you know, discovering bands that sonically probably sound nothing like the bands that got me into everything, but for some way changed. Like the Creation Records documentary that I watched recently, like has really nothing to do with punk or ska, which kind of kicked this whole thing off for me. But just the groundwork that those bands and labels laid down to make it possible for other things to exist. And it's just sort of just doing the homework,
Yeah.
wanting to know, wanting to do the homework is another thing.
Right. The and so once you went to that show, started stage diving, and like that was you were in. Did you when did the band life start to come into into picture?
Pretty much immediately, but it was a very loose form of what a band is. So these were the older kids that were in that band, and they would take, once after that show, I like begged them, like, take me to your next show. And I think it was, maybe a few towns away, and it was with the Slackers. So I went to that show. And at that time, like, there was a big like oi skinhead presence going on in the area, and I was like, whoa, this is sketchy. Probably wasn't as sketchy as it seemed to me at 14 or 15, but
Right.
I was like, well, but it's cool just to see these bands, because previously I've only ever seen like Aerosmith, my mom would bring me, with Collective Soul, or the Spin Doctors were like my other shows that I saw.
Sure.
Not shows, they were
Concerts, yeah.
But there was something amazing about these kids who are 2 or 3 years older than me, and getting up on a stage and seeing people, 150, 200 people react to them. And I was like, to me, it was the same level as being Collective Soul opening for Aerosmith or whatever. I was like, who cares how many people? It's like, look how stoked they are, like that's what was cool about it. So then I had that guitar, couldn't play it, never took lessons, didn't know anything, barely knew how to put it in tune. But I had a friend who was a year younger than me who was like into the Exploited and would, had a bunch of these punk rock compilations, and we would just sit in his bedroom and try to like learn songs or write songs. And I have no idea what they sounded like, but we were called the Impossibles.
Oh, good.
Before we knew that there was a band called the Impossibles.
Of course, yeah.
And we were like, in our heads, we were going to be, as soon as we could find more people, like a 9-piece ska punk band,
Dude, I love the ambition already, where you're just like,
we drew logos, we drew like what our album covers would look like, while not having like more than 20 minutes or 20 seconds of like an actual song, let alone people to play.
Right. Dude,
So,
it kind of sounds like what you do with management now,
yeah, I'm just making it up as we go along.
Yeah, you're just putting together ska bands. That's all you're really trying to do. Try to put a 9-piece band together.
I want to see how people can make as little money as possible. Oh, I know. Split it 9 ways after you already split it with other people.
So perfect. It's a financial model that will never break.
Every time I see a ska band, I'm just like, I love what you're doing, but Christ, there's got to be like, it's got to be tough when you're just starting out and there's $150 to go around.
That's amazing. So that did you actually get to a point where you could play a show as that?
No.
Okay.
No, that was but that bassist and I eventually found people, and as like the year went on, a couple months went on, we got more and more, at that time your tastes are changing so fast because you're constantly discovering a new band. So immediately after 411 releases a video with the Promise Ring song, and now I want to sound like the Promise Ring. Mm-hmm. Oh, and and then Saves the Day from New Jersey, obviously, kind of make an impact in 1997ish, and now I want to sound like Saves the Day kind of thing. So I went to my first Warped Tour. I found there was a comp for $1 that was Drive Through, had bands on it. Crank had songs on it, like Doghouse. It was a double CD that came in a plastic bag.
Okay.
Like this is what I remember from the 1997 Warped Tour. Aside from like seeing Snapcase, and I was like, this is awesome.
Right.
But I got this comp, and Mineral was on it. So like constantly, so many different genres are under the, like, I'm like, what the hell? This is all considered like the same umbrella of like punk rock or whatever it is.
Right.
So I'm just like, this is the most amazing thing in the world, that you can sound like Mineral and maybe Propagandhi and maybe, you know, Against All Authority. Somehow it's all the same thing, and you could play whatever you want.
Right. There's a charming element to that, because you know, I think with obviously youth comes the idea that, like, because you're putting so much new inside of you, that, you know, you've got no expectations. You're carrying no baggage. You're not like, oh, I heard that band are a bunch of dicks or whatever. You're putting everything in your head. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I always sort of gravitated towards more melodic kind of softer music. Just as a Beatles fan as a kid, I always liked Paul McCartney's pop songs. And, you know, that's not to say I didn't like angry, you know, fast punk or anything, or hardcore, but it was always just like something that I would listen to, you know, at a specific time. So eventually when I found bands that were a little more melancholy, or, you know, we're talking about something that resonated with a 16-year-old at this time, you know, Chris Conley on, you know, Can't Slow Down was a year older than me, you know. So something starts to connect even on another level, aside from it just being something you think is cool and want to be a part of. Well, now it's connecting on a kind of emotional and, you know, a bit bigger. It's connecting much harder and deeper. So then we started a band called Misled Youth. Good name, right? After the Zero skateboard video.
Yeah, that's total. I was about to reference that, but yeah, that's appropriate. I mean, did you? Because that sounds very Liberty Spike punk rock, but I presume that wasn't the sound.
Well, it was also the thing, we had to deal with who was around to be in a band with. So we had a drummer who was a really nice guy who I still see all the time, but was into like, you know, hip hop, but he just happened to have a drum kit. And our bassist, who was like Liberty Spike punk rock kid, but he just played bass and knew some of the stuff. Me, who was like on now the very beginnings of like what would become the biggest, you know, era, which was probably like indie rock emo kid, who just started to find that stuff, and then a singer who was into like just straight up Pennywise. So
what a motley crew of people.
What a motley crew of a band, I'll tell you. It was, but we had two original songs that were very like, you know, this thing, it was very political, you know, who knows what it was like, but it was political punk. And then I got them to cover a Promise Ring song, and I think we covered a Propagandhi song.
That's amazing.
Or we covered like Millencolin, like Bullion, or something that was very skate punk.
Right. You're like, okay, I think this is our common ground. We can agree on this.
Yeah, we all got like a little, it was very democratic. We all got a little part of us in it. But we played like, I think, one house party, and then I finally met Ace, and that kind of changed a lot. So
right, that put your trajectory to the obviously what you've been doing for a long time. Did you have a sense of like who you wanted to become, as far as like, you know, hey, I want to do this for a job, or was it basically just like, oh, I'm going to ride this music thing out as long as I can, as far as you progressing through high school and college and that sort of stuff?
I think I didn't know how you could make money doing it, but I know that I would go at that point, you know, I was starting the drive. I was going to shows every single weekend if possible. You know, if there was a good one, I'm going to it, whether it's a grind show or if it's an indie rock show in a house. You know, I was going to everything because that's where people I wanted to be around were hanging out. I was joining every street team I could. I was starting a fanzine or a webzine with a friend of mine. So I knew you could somehow get paid to do it, but I didn't think, I just assumed that these guys would go on tour and then they would go and work at a record store. And I thought that was the coolest life in the world. You know, I was like, this is what it must be to be in high fidelity. Like, you work at a cool record store, and then your cool boss lets you take off and you go and play if you were huge, you would play the Rotunda. And that was huge to me. But if you were like, just, you know, kind of growing, you'd play the local VFW hall, and hopefully you'd have my band open, you know? So
That was the dream. That was the dream.
That was a dream. I remember when Early November opened for Branson. I was like, this is it. This is as big as you get. Like, Branson are huge,
Right.
and this is all you need. And like, we're on our way. And I remember wanting to sign to Deep Elm more than anything. You know,
So good.
Like, I don't want to, I don't have any intention of like saying that would have been a mistake or anything, but like at the time, like that was the coolest label to me. That and like Saddle Creek, and like these are the coolest things in the world. And Branson probably never made anything significant money wise.
No, yeah. But it's funny because you strike me as a very, focused and driven person. And it's just it's so great to hear those goals, like, because obviously looking back, they're so small and minuscule, but that was your mentality because you didn't have this scope of like, oh, dude, I can't wait to be on Capitol Records. What? No, Capitol Records?
Yeah.
Why is that even a goal? Deep Elm is the goal.
Yeah, I think this was before anybody had any, like, aside from Blink-182, and aside from maybe Less Than Jake having some success, I don't think anybody really, obviously Green Day and Offspring, sure, but like those were out of the picture. Those were now radio mainstream bands. I probably turned my back on them anyway.
Right.
But like people were starting to, there wasn't a real success story that I could connect to just yet. But it was right around the corner, really, with kind of the starting line, which was we played before the Early November was the Early November. We played many shows before they were the starting line. They were called Sunday Drive, who we then named a song after. And they got signed. They went to New Found Glory. They were in, we saw them on TV, and that was the real like connecting thing there. That like, oh wow, you don't have to sign to Deep Elm, and you can get on TV with this. Like it was all about to happen again.
Right. And so then as you were called something else before Early November?
Well, it was an incarnation of the Early November. We were again that bass player who was into the Exploited, and a real quick kind of way I found this guy is I was that bass player and I had a lunch period, and Ace and his friend Jim had a lunch period, and I just saw a dude wearing a Fat Records t-shirt. Like it was wearing a Lagwagon shirt, but I saw the Fat Records logo on the back, and I said, we have to go sit next to those dudes right now. So we went up and we're just like, hey, do you guys listen to punk? And they said, the dude Jim said, yeah. I said, let's start a band. So we started a band. Ace was into like nothing but Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots at the time, but we were like, here is your homework. Listen to the Alkaline Trio, Weston, Promise Ring, Get Up Kids. And like, boom, he was in like a day, it seemed like a day later, but like
right.
that changed everything for him. And he's like, okay, he happened to play guitar. So that worked out. And he's like a much better player than all of us. So we're like, great. He can actually write the songs, or at least, tell us what to do or help write the songs.
Right.
And we would like kind of create and shape his taste. It worked.
That's what you do. You just like bleed off of one another. And when you're open to it and you're just like, oh man, this is great, keep giving me more, and you're like, yeah, we will, because you're the one that's going to actually execute something musically.
Yeah, it's like I talked to Forrest once when I first joined Hello Goodbye, and he was telling me about like, yeah, I went to school with so and so from Bleeding Through and so from Thrice, or so, and all these people were like around him, and I'm like, that's nuts. Like I had to create, like, not to sound cool, but like we had to create somebody. We had so little to choose from that we had to like.
You shoehorned people into it.
Yeah, we had to. We were picking up anything we can and just hoping that we would find some common ground. And it's like maybe like the overwhelming options leads to competition, and there's so many bands, but
right.
There was one, and it was us in our high school at that time.
You didn't feel that crushing competition of like, oh man, who's gonna get these shows? It's like, well, we'll probably get it. Like we have a chance to play this show.
Well, we had to go outside of our town, which is in the area I live in now, which seemed like it was a million miles away, but is actually only about a 25-minute, 30-minute drive.
Right.
But so we would just. This is where that scene was alive and well, because there's just more people. There's more high schools. There's more. It was closer to Philadelphia, so
right. There's more to pull from.
Yeah, so we would come up here and play backyard shows with bands like Don't Look Down in the starting line before they were those bands, and
Right.
it's sort of a
You built it from there. Once you guys started to get your feet wet and playing shows, as far as like the early November and all that stuff was concerned. When did it for you obviously start to get at a level where you were just like, wow, like this is weird? Like either from the smallest thing of obviously signing to Drive Through and doing a label on the West Coast, being interested in a band on the East Coast. Or, at what point did you feel like I wouldn't even say overwhelmed, but you just couldn't believe that these certain things were happening?
probably like right around then in 2002 when we signed. But we signed our drummer. This is a different drummer now. This is Jeff. We're talking like the current lineup of the early November. So we're talking about Jeff, who was 17 years old and didn't graduate high school yet, but we had signed the Drive Through that maybe April
Hmm.
of 2002. So we signed to the label, and they're like, okay, you're going to be on Warped Tour this summer, because they had their own stage.
Right.
Remember that year?
I do.
So they had their own stage, which was like Finch and the starting line and something corporate, like a ridiculous stage.
Right.
It was massive. They're like, well, you're going to be on Warped Tour this summer. We're like, wow, like that's nuts. But
Right.
it was all so like surreal that we thought like they were just going to, it's going to be easy. We're just going to go there. We're going to play our songs. We didn't have any idea the amount of work that it took to be in a band. We had never played out of state. Even we only played New Jersey at that time. We did no touring. We played under 10 shows as a band. We printed our own t-shirts. We didn't know like anything to do because there was nobody as a reference. There was a starting line, but we didn't know them that well.
Right. There was no structure for you. See, I didn't know that you guys were that green. So your first national tour was the Warped Tour.
Yep.
That's
It went horribly wrong.
right.
Horribly wrong.
Right.
So Jeff graduates. He gives his cap and gown to his mom, and this sounds like the coolest made up story, but it's not. Like he gives his cap and gown to his mom. We already have his bag packed. We have the van, which was the starting line's old van that they gave to us because the starting line was now on a bus.
Right.
So they gave us their old van, and they said, "Here you go. You're going to start in Tempe, Arizona. You live in New Jersey." We had to delay it by a whole day because his mom wanted him to walk on the field. Grabs his cap and gown, gets in the van. We start leaving that night. We get, like 2 or 3 days later, we get there and we play our first show on the Warped Tour, and we're like, "Holy shit, this is hot!" Like this is insane. Like the drive, we didn't have any idea of the actual length of the country and how big it is. Like
Yeah.
like we knew it was gonna like we had a printed out, we had an atlas and some MapQuest directions printed out, and that was it. Like no like I don't think we had any cell phones. We had calling cards.
Right.
Like no cell phone, no GPS, nothing. Like no money, just
just
going.
just piecing it together. It's also so interesting too because I'm trying to think of a label that you could equate to the level that Drive Through was at as far as like a mainstream perspective, because to me there isn't at this at this juncture in music. There's no label. There's labels that are cool and obviously have a distinct vibe, but not to the point of where you're plugging in a stage at Warped Tour and you're just massive, like immediate attention.
Thinking about it in like today's terms, it's like that's huge. That stage was outdrawing a lot of the main stages that year.
Totally.
Like, and I guess maybe because they were just partners with MCA at the time, and there was just a lot of money to go around. But like, there's also a lot of records to be sold. I don't know how many records Finch sold on What It Is to Burn, but this was like the height of that time for that band.
And for you guys to literally plug and play of like, okay, like here it is like I can't even. I'm surprised you guys got through it. Like that's hard.
We didn't at all. We didn't. We flipped our van 2 weeks or a week in.
Oh wow! I didn't. I think I vaguely remember that news story, but wow.
Well, here's where this is going to become the most ridiculous. Like, I remember meeting Bob Nana when we went on tour with Hey Mercedes, and he was telling us a story, and we're like, wait a minute. He walks up and he's like, before we took this tour, we heard a story about you guys. It can't be true. And he told me the story I'm about to tell you, and I'm like, no, that's all true. This is the worst thing. So, we're on Tempe, right? We play. I would love to go back and look at the routing. I can't believe I never have, but like just to see where we were. But it starts in Arizona. We play literally a couple shows. And on the way between Salt Lake to, I want to say Vegas, we were passing through there was a huge dust storm in Salt Lake. Huge. And like we ran inside the Atticus tent because all the tents were flipping over. And we're like, ooh, that was creepy.
Right.
Like poles are coming out, those pop-up tent poles, and you're like, ooh, that almost hit me. Like sketchy. And then we get in the van later that night. We brought a guy along with us I won't name him, but we brought a guy with us who was a friend from town who just was, yeah, I'll help you guys. I'll help you carry your gear and sell merch, which we didn't even have a table. We just walked around the Warped Tour and, hey, want a t-shirt?
Right.
And, and he was like, I'll help drive because you guys are going to be, out like all day long, just trying to meet people. But he was also so into Finch and Glassjaw that he would never sleep. So he's just like going off. And we're like, hey, man, you should definitely, at least we had like the foresight to know, like, well, not foresight, but we said, Steve, you should be sleeping. You should. He's like, no, I'm fine. I'm just going to drink a ton of Red Bull and we're going to drive right through it.
Yeah.
But I don't think we understood like what a 7-hour overnight drive on Warped Tour actually is for a band that has nowhere to go all day except for a hot van.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I don't care who it is. I will never put one of my bands on Warped Tour in just a van. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like I won't do it. Just
You know it. Yeah, from experience.
Yeah. So they will so that overnight drive, it's a long one. All the drives out there long. And we're cruising down the road, and the Starting Line's van, they took out all their bench seats and couldn't find them when it was time to give us the van. So we just had loose thrift store couches.
Oh my God.
Sitting in this van. No trailer because we were sharing backline, but like, a couple guitars and like 2 boxes of merch, and then our personal belongings. We wake up to our drummer, Jeff, who was in the passenger seat saying, Steve, wake up. Or I just named him.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this story's been around a million times. Steve, wake up. To then Steve waking up and like freaking out and ripping that wheel so hard to the right that the van just starts spinning in the street and flips off the right side of the road into a dirt ditch into the middle of the desert, and it flips 1.5 times and lands on its side. And just everything fucked up everywhere. Like there's stuff everywhere. No one was hurt except for I was a little hurt. Something landed right on my neck.
Mm-hmm.
So we all crawl out of the driver's side window, which is the only thing we can get out of. And I remember getting up there, getting on top of the van in the middle of the night, probably like, and just immediately like my body seizing up and being like this. I think I'm paralyzed.
Yeah.
Like something like got pinched, and my adrenaline like made it okay until like I calmed down, and then I couldn't move like easily. Buses are flying right by us, from the tour. We're trying to flag people down. No one's stopping. Ambulance comes, police come. I spend the night in the emergency room just doing x-rays and whatnot. They give me a neck brace. And then we spend the weirdest day of our lives in Fallon, Nevada, which is where they test a lot of nuclear bombs, which is what I learned later, just kind of sitting in a hotel room, waiting the call drive-through and just being like, okay, well, we're going home because they're going to drop us because we're idiots. And we flipped our van, and we got to call our parents and say, don't worry, we're not dead, but everything's ruined,
Right.
And I'll also very vivid memory, just sitting in this sketchy, weird hotel that's not a chain. It was just a weird Bates Motel kind of thing. And just, questioning whether or not you're even alive. You're like, did something happen? Like, is this hell? What is going on?
Yeah. No, it's that total gut check moment of like, I made a horrible mistake. This was an awful idea.
It was rough. And then drive-through was like, no, you don't have to go home. Why don't we fly you out to California, and like you just stay with us, and like you can kind of just relax for a little bit. And like it was a really nice gesture. They were like, you can come out here and just kind of live at the house, and we'll take you on a boat, and you can be in the new Homegrown video, which we were. And like you can just hang out and like get to meet us, because they haven't even met us at that point. Well, aside from one meeting, but we were getting our way out there, and we're like, okay, that sounds cool. So we fly to where they lived and spent a week with them, just going to the local Warped Tour dates and, Ventura, and it was all right.
Yeah. Well,
but
it got you back to the point of like, okay, like let's reevaluate this. We got to do this smarter.
they brought us to the Hollywood Guitar Center and said, "Go ahead and pick out a new guitar each." And so we're just also now knowing. I know that this is all going into what we owe the label, but it was. I would probably have to do the same thing today because we're kids. We had no money. So they did a very nice thing by just saying, okay, you wrecked the van. Cool. That's 20 grand. You wrecked all your gear. That's another 5 grand. Well, now we'll go spend another 5 grand to buy you new gear. So like out of the gate, we're 35 grand or so in the hole.
Right.
Before releasing a single song. 2 weeks later, we fly back out to New Jersey. We rent a van that they set up for us. And we're driving down to Atlanta to start back up with the tour. We get into a parking lot. And there's an attendant there who says, "Hey, you have to leave the keys with us because we might have to move it." And that's what they do in Philadelphia. So we said, "Okay, here you go. How much do we owe you?" He's like, "Yeah, $10.50 or whatever." Give him the money. We go on our way to find a strip club because we're dudes on the road for the first time. We're living. Let's go try it. He tells us that one's like a couple blocks away. We end up walking like 3 miles. We find it. We realize it's like a gentleman's club, like a very nice 21 up, limousines outside. It's like 2 miles away or so. And I turn to Ace and I say, "That dude stole our van."
Yeah, totally. Oh no.
We walk. He's like, "Yup." His current wife, not currently, he had many, but like his girlfriend, who is now his wife, was there, and she was like, "Let's do it. It'll be fun. Let's go to the strip club and see what it's like to be on the road." He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "He definitely stole our van." He's like, "But don't say anything yet because I don't want to freak anybody out. Let's just make sure we know."
Right.
We get back, van's gone. We see a big sign that says "No attendant on duty. Pay here," pointing down to a machine that we completely ignored.
Dude, 2 vans.
2 vans in the span of 3 weeks. And luckily we took out our personal belongings and gear and put it in the hotel, which is where we were staying to meet up at Warped Tour.
Yeah.
His girlfriend starts crying. Ace and I just start laughing because we're like, this is ridiculous.
Right.
We call it drive-through. They're like, "You're the dumbest idiots on the planet. You're going to go tomorrow. 2 of you are going to be with RX Bandits. 2 of you are going to be with Finch, and you're going to finish out this tour." So
I seriously cannot believe that they had patience. At that point, if I was on the other end, I would just be like, "You know what? It's just not going to work out."
Yeah, not worth it. I would do that now. If I was managing a band now and they're like, "Hey man, sorry this happened again," I'd be like, "Yo, what's wrong with you?"
Right.
This is nuts. So we play one more show in Atlanta. We show up with our gear, with our little bags, and both bands are like, "You're not coming on our bus." "This wasn't cleared with us. Sorry, you have to go home." And we're like, "Oh man." And then we went home. And that was how you play all of 5 days on 2002 Warped Tour and end up 50 grand now in debt or whatever.
Yeah. Barely survive the entire scenario. That is a very humbling experience.
Yeah, that was so that's how we started.
Yeah.
That's it. And
trial by fire. So basically it's like, obviously at that point you have like nothing else could really go wrong. Like you've experienced pretty much the worst of the worst. And so anything that was thrown at you after that was, you probably could obviously take with a grain of salt.
Yeah, we always had sort of bad luck, and I know a lot of bands say that, but like, and also it was just being ignorant and stupid and like not really knowing how the world worked because we were sheltered farm kids who really didn't know how anything did anything. So I want to point some of the blame there, but like, hey, what are you gonna do?
No, for sure. And for sake of time, because I think we could probably potentially make this like a 2-part podcast, which we probably will at some point. But the last thing I want to hit on was something that you've said in a few interviews that really resonated with me, and I think it's such an important topic. And I'm sure you learn this later in life, but the fact that you obviously once early November ended, and you obviously played with Hello Goodbye for a while, but you mentioned that giving yourself an opportunity to know yourself outside of the context of a band. I mean, even though you were playing with Hello Goodbye, but just like giving that time to obviously know yourself outside of what you've known. You're Joe from early November. Like that's what you are. I think that's something that I think a lot of people don't you don't consider when you start a band, because obviously that's that's not part of your agenda at that point. And so like was that a difficult process for you to like come to grips with like who you were outside of the context of the band?
Yeah, I guess it was hard to relate to a lot of people because you missed a lot of missed college. So you missed that whole meeting new people who are from different backgrounds and who are from different towns. Like all we knew before was a few towns around us and then bands. And bands aren't normal people. They are, but like when they're on tour, you're like band friends and it's like a different lifestyle. You never really had a chance to kind of live and like I don't know, a normal person, but I hate using that term. But
Yeah.
it was when we ended, we had to like I think we all just wanted to not be a band, and not because we didn't like each other or like being a band. We just wanted to see what the other side was all about, and not being in a relationship for a month and then going back out on tour and just having talking on the phone and not really even being in a relationship, whether it be a girlfriend or with friends. It's just like you're part-time there and your everything else is on the road.
Right.
And that's a weird thing. And then once it ends, it's even weirder to adjust because the jokes you use on the road don't fly with other people because being on the road is weird and people are weird, and like dropping a bottle of water, it doesn't fly, where in the green room it doesn't matter, someone else is cleaning that up. And not that like we trash places, but like there's just a different way of living that you don't consider when you're on the road 8, 9, 10 months out of the year, as much as we were touring in those early days. So yeah, how to kind of figure out
where you kind of sat not only with your home life, but obviously with yourself, of just that whole identity piece of your life.
Yeah, it was tricky. It's something that like I feel I've got a pretty good grasp on now.
Mm-hmm.
The band stuff is less of a part of my life now. It's a huge part of like my heart and everything and where I came from, but like we just don't do it as much anymore.
Right.
And I just try to like from all the mistakes we made and what we learned, I try to pass those on to other people. But it was a wild time, man.
Yeah. And I don't know whether it was like my own perception of like when when I played in bands, it was one of those things where it's like I really tried to focus on the fact that, okay, like clearly what I am doing, and I wasn't this mature as far as being able to express it, but just the idea that like, okay, if a person doesn't like my band, it doesn't necessarily mean they don't like me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard lesson to learn when you're younger, because everything you do is 140%. And it's like, and then the idea of like, well, I am this person outside of the context of my band. Like there are layers to me as a person, as opposed to like like you mentioned, where it's like you're just known for this one thing, and what do you do after that?
Yeah.
I mean, anybody in an artistic endeavor goes through that sort of identity crisis when the thing that they've known for years doesn't exist anymore, and like where do you sit with that?
Yeah, and it was weird to kind of have a regular desk job and have a guy would sit next to me and he'd tell me about how well his son's band was doing. And I knew who that band was, and I knew that they weren't doing well. And I knew that they were just kind of in LA trying to like, playing the Viper and like doing all this stuff like
right,
that wasn't like real, and not wanting to be like, we just got back from Japan, bro, or we just sold out, whatever venue, but it just ended. And I didn't want to sound like a washed up, jaded kid already, but like,
yeah,
it's just like a weird thing that you have to like step back from and be like, you know what, to the most of the world, you're not a guy from a band, because that band wasn't that big, but in your little microcosm, like your band may have been kind of big, and that was a big part of it. And now you got to figure out how to meet these two worlds in the middle and
right,
figure out how to get along with everybody.
I think you said it perfectly when it's like, you can cite even the largest bands within the independent culture. Yeah, whatever, Green Day, Blink, like clearly those names are obviously known. Like if you talk to, a parent, they will have at least heard of that name. But still, even if you drill just even one level lower, those are lost. Like no one knows who those bands are, even though they're massive into, A Day to Remember. People don't know that. That's not mainstream, even though they're gigantic and can play in front of 10,000 people a night. You have to make sure that sort of, spirit is in check, so you don't become that person who, yeah, like you said, that washed up guy at 26 years old, where it's like, oh, I remember that. It's like, oh, really?
Yeah, it's, I sat next to another guy who was in like a hair metal band who got signed in like 91 or something, like right before Nirvana killed it. And he would just be like, yeah, we were on CBS Records, man. We were about to tour with Bon Jovi and then Nirvana. And I'm like, bummer,
Yeah.
I don't want to be that guy, at all. Thinking, I think, just objectively about everything and realizing that it's an awesome thing and you're super grateful, but it's also not as big of a deal to other people.
Yeah.
And you can't act like it is. Like, my mom doesn't even know who like Vampire Weekend would be.
Right.
They're a big band. So
Right,
it's just like,
yeah. The parents are a good barometer. That's definitely that's definitely a test. If you think a band is big, just ask your parents. They'll probably not know.
yeah.
Well, that is a perfect lesson to end on, Joe. I really appreciate your time, dude.
Thank you, man. I had a good time. I'm glad we got a chance to do this.
So that was Joe. Nice to get to know him a little bit even more. And aren't those stories insane? It just goes to show, like, for those people that don't have Drive Through Records in a context, like, that is how big of a label that they were. Where it's just like the massive power and influence that they had on Warped Tour and just the music scene in general was just, it just reminded me. It affirmed my knowledge hearing Joe's stories. Great stories nonetheless, and thank you, Joe, for hanging out. The editor, and you know what? I'm going to start calling him producer. He's a producer because he contributes creative juices to this show that I might not have thought of in the first place. So the producer of this show is Tom Richfield, and visit 100wordspodcast.com, visit propertyofzach.com. And for those of you that actually listen to this, I always like to tease. We've got some hot news of upcoming guests. Next week is Matt Miller. He's a professional photographer, and he also played in bands like Most Precious Blood and a bunch of other stuff, but he's hands down my favorite photographer in circulation currently. He just does such great work. And then after that is Dave Varellin from Botch, the singer of Botch, and also the current singer of Narrows. And then, in no particular order, there's some other people. There might be a person who sings for a band called Tigers something, and there may be a person that plays in a band called The Locust or Retox. Just throwing out some hints. So anyways, it's just great chats coming up. So please subscribe to the show, follow along. It's free. You pretty much can't say no to that. And the 2-year anniversary, 104th episode. Oh, so excited to share that stuff with you. Anyways, until next week, be safe, everybody.